name's Jabberjaw. I can already taste those chocolate-covered hot dogs.
It was 1976. Saturday morning television was a battleground, and one studio, Hanna-Barbera, was winning it almost single-handedly. Kids were glued to their TV sets every weekend, cereal bowls in hand, watching cartoon after cartoon pour out of the same assembly line. That year, one of those cartoons arrived with a lot going for it. A catchy gimmick, a talented cast, and the biggest pop culture wave of the decade riding right behind it. And yet, in less than a single season, it was gone.
Remember, Jabber? The professor's studying it. I'd better go stand guard.
This is the story of how Jabberjaw, 1976, the 70s cartoon favorite, fell apart. Part 1. The world that built Jabberjaw. To understand how Jabberjaw came to exist, you have to understand the Saturday morning television landscape of the early to mid-1970s, and the studio that practically owned it. Hanna-Barbera Productions had been the dominant force in American animation since the late 1950s. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera had built their studio from the ground up, launching the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Top Cat, Johnny Quest, and a parade of other beloved series across 2 decades. By the early 1970s, their operation was massive, producing content for all 3 major broadcast networks simultaneously: ABC, NBC, and CBS.
Hey, Bubbles. Gee, I thought I heard a turtle talk.
No other studio even came close to that output. The model they had perfected was efficient, economical, and built around a principle sometimes called limited animation, where theatrical cartoons from studios like Disney used thousands of individual drawings per minute of screen time. Hanna-Barbera had worked out a way to tell stories with far fewer. Characters moved in repeated loops. Backgrounds were reused extensively. The result was animation that cost a fraction of the theatrical model, but could be produced at the volume television demanded. It worked. For years, it worked beautifully. But by the mid-1970s, cracks had started to show, not in the studio's output volume, but in the freshness of its ideas. The clearest example was what happened after the success of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?
What's an empty old suit of armor doing in the driver's seat of this pickup?
Which had debuted in 1969. Scooby-Doo was a genuine phenomenon, a group of teenagers traveling with an anthropomorphic animal companion, stumbling into mysteries, and ultimately unmasking a villain hiding behind a supernatural disguise. It was funny, it was a little bit scary, and it had an irresistible energy. Children loved it, networks loved it, and Hanna-Barbera, quite understandably, decided to replicate it. What followed was a long run of series built on the same architecture. A group of teenagers, an animal mascot, travel from one location to the next, a villain to defeat at the end. Josie and the Pussycats arrived in 1970, adding a rock band element to the mix. Speed Buggy came in 1973 with a talking car instead of a dog.
That's me.
Goober and the Ghost Chasers also appeared in 1973. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, despite the name, was another band and mystery cartoon from the same year. Each one followed the template closely enough that critics and viewers alike began to notice. The formula was being stretched, and the creative duo most responsible for some of it, writers Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, were beginning to feel the ceiling closing in. Ruby and Spears were 2 of the most important figures at Hanna-Barbera at the time. Joe Ruby had come to the studio after a stint as an animator and editor at Walt Disney Productions, a tour in the Army, and some live-action television work before landing at Hanna-Barbera as a sound editor. Ken Spears arrived through a different door.
What's the big idea? Don't you know I'm a hero?
His friendship with William Hanna's son gave him an early entry point into the studio, also as a sound editor. The two became close quickly, and in the kind of organic creative environment that a small studio produces, they graduated from sound editing into screenwriting. They proved themselves with scripts for Space Ghost and the Herculoids before pitching the concept that would define their careers and change Saturday morning television forever. In 1969, when Hanna-Barbera needed a new animated mystery series for CBS, Ruby and Spears brought them Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? The show became the studio's longest-running franchise. Eventually, after their contracts ran out and their requests to advance to associate producers were turned down, Ruby and Spears left Hanna-Barbera. They went to DePatie Frayling Enterprises.
Now what do we do? This overgrown guppy has gotten us in a real jam.
And from there, were hired by television executive Fred Silverman, first to supervise Saturday morning programming at CBS, and then at ABC. By 1976 and 1977, they were ABC network executives helping decide which shows would be commissioned and when. It was in that capacity, as creative overseers of the network's Saturday morning schedule rather than studio employees, that they brought Jabberjaw into existence, commissioning it from the very studio they had left. Part 2, The Shark in the Room, How Jaws Changed Everything. You cannot talk about Jabberjaw without talking about Jaws. On June 20th, 1975, Steven Spielberg's thriller opened nationwide.
Yes. Where will you be?
Choo-choo club on the Ebb Tide Boulevard.
It was based on Peter Benchley's novel about a great white shark terrorizing a small beach community, and it became a cultural event unlike anything Hollywood had produced in recent memory. Made for approximately $9 million, the film earned back more than 11 times that amount in its first 2 months alone. It held the #1 spot at the box office for 14 weeks, became the first film to gross over $100 million domestically, and effectively invented the concept of the summer blockbuster as we know it today. Every corner of American popular culture felt the impact. Beach attendance dropped in the summer of 1975. Shark sightings and panicked evacuations increased. A whole generation of children grew up genuinely afraid of the water. A Gallup poll conducted in the fall of 1975
Take that door off if I were you. It doesn't do a thing for you.
found that 21% of Americans had already seen the film, and another 15% planned to. Among adults under 30, the numbers were even higher. The film became a talking point in homes, schools, and offices across the country, and the great white shark moved from a largely abstract threat in the public imagination to something vivid and omnipresent. The word shark had taken on a kind of electric charge in the cultural imagination. Frightening, yes, but also endlessly fascinating. Merchandisers, television producers, and entertainment executives all took notice. If sharks were what people were thinking about, sharks were what content would be built around. At Hanna-Barbera, the thinking was straightforward.
I'll catch them. Oh! How do you get this thing off automatic pilot?
Take a shark, soften it into a comedic character, and build a show around it. The result was Jabberjaw, a 15-foot, air-breathing, anthropomorphic great white shark who played drums in a rock band. The Jaws connection was the commercial hook, the rock band was the formula, and the setting, an underwater civilization in the year 2076, was the one genuinely creative addition that gave the show at least a veneer of novelty. Part 3, the show itself, what Jabberjaw was. Jabberjaw premiered on ABC on September 11, 1976. It was created by Joe Ruby and Ken Spears and produced by Hanna-Barbera, with William Hanna and Joseph Barbera serving as executive producers.
Wow! The mountain's hollow!
Brilliant, Clamhead, but how do we get in?
Direction fell to Charles A. Nichols, an experienced Hanna-Barbera animation director. The music was composed by longtime studio composer Hoyt Curtin, the man whose work had underscored everything from the Flintstones to Johnny Quest. Alongside Paul DeCourt, the premise placed the story a century into the future, the year 2076, in which human civilization had expanded beneath the ocean's surface. Domed underwater cities dotted the seafloor, and it was in this world that a rock band called the Neptunes made their home. The Neptunes consisted of 4 teenagers and their shark drummer, Biff, the level-headed guitarist and de facto leader, Shelley, a dark-haired, sharp-tongued tambourine player with a haughty streak, Bubbles, a blonde, good-natured keyboardist with a tendency to make chaotic situations worse,
Back again, not even from a little goldfish.
and Clamhead, the tall, red-haired bassist who was Jabberjaw's closest friend, prone to exclaiming something along the lines of "Wowie wow wow" whenever things went sideways. And at the center of it all, Jabberjaw himself. Voiced by Frank Welker, Jabberjaw was conceived as a lovable, bumbling figure, a shark who just wanted to be accepted. Welker based the voice on Curly Howard of the Three Stooges, and layered onto it a catchphrase borrowed from stand-up comedian Rodney Dangerfield: "I don't get no respect." Every episode, Jabberjaw would be chased off, dismissed, or physically ejected by the citizens of whatever underwater city the Neptunes happened to be visiting. Because in the show's world, sharks were still feared as dangerous predators,
Wait, I'll put the car on automatic pilot so we can run through our number.
regardless of whether they could talk, play drums, and hold a conversation. The joke repeated across all 16 episodes. Jabberjaw shows up, someone panics, Jabberjaw gets thrown out, Jabberjaw is hurt, and Jabberjaw does it all again anyway. The structure of each episode followed the Scooby-Doo model almost exactly. The Neptunes would arrive somewhere, a new underwater city, always with an aquatic pun baked into its name. Encounter a villain with a scheme to take over a city, or exploit some underwater resource, stumble through a series of comic misadventures, and ultimately foil the plan, often during a chase sequence set to one of the 5 original songs the show had in its rotation. Each episode opened with a cold introduction to whatever trouble awaited.
Give up, Lo. I'm a friend of Jabberjaw and your days are numbered. What do you got to say about that?
Moved through the Neptunes' investigation, built to a confrontation, and ended with the villain neutralized, the band celebrating, and Jabberjaw usually delivering some variation of his catchphrase one final time. The villain would be caught, the kids would celebrate, and the episode would close on something close to the same note it had opened on. The underwater setting brought some genuinely inventive location names. The show had fun with aquatic puns for its fictional cities, but the bones underneath were entirely familiar. Before each confrontation, Jabberjaw had a habit of warming himself up verbally, announcing what he was about to do. "I'll give him one of these, then I give him one of those," while working through a kind of improvised martial arts routine. The moment was always played for laughs.
What if the monster shows up again?
Why, I'll roar, grr, and I'll jump, and then I'll roar.
And Welker's delivery made it funnier than it had any right to be on paper. Frank Welker, it should be said, delivered a performance that stood out even within a fairly paint-by-numbers production. Welker had already established himself as a crucial part of the Hanna-Barbera voice ensemble through his work on Scooby-Doo, where he had originated the role of Fred Jones in 1969. His ability to craft distinct voices and bring genuine comic timing to animated characters was evident from the start. The Curly Howard impression he built Jabberjaw on had real life and warmth, and in later years, the role helped boost demand for his services across the industry. He would go on to actually voice Curly Howard himself in the Robonic Stooges segments on The Skatebirds in 1977.
But just to be on the safe side, let's call the police. Well, I'll get him.
using essentially the same vocal approach he had developed for Jabberjaw. Tommy Cook voiced Biff, Barry Gordon brought Clamhead to life, Julie McWhirter played Bubbles, and Patricia Paris handled Shelley. The character dynamics were immediately familiar to anyone who had watched Josie and the Pussycats. Shelley mirrored the imperious Alexandra, Bubbles echoed the good-natured Melody, and Clamhead carried enough of Shaggy's nervous energy that the comparison was hard to miss. Biff, as the measured, competent leader, mapped cleanly onto any number of the same archetype across the Scooby formula. These were not characters built from the ground up, so much as arrangements of existing parts. Supporting guest voices across the 16 episodes included a notable roster of Hanna-Barbera regulars. Casey Kasem, Don Messick, Janet Waldo, John Stevenson, and Key Luke, among others. The same pool of voice talent that populated most of Hanna-Barbera's 1970s output cycled through Jabberjaw's 16 episodes, lending the show the same familiar vocal quality that marked the studio's entire library of the period. The show was also previewed before its official debut, aired on ABC the evening of September 10, 1976, during a cartoon segment on the Bill Cosby variety program Cos. The preview featured Jabberjaw appearing in character on what was otherwise a live-action comedy variety broadcast, an unusual cross-promotional move that gave the new show a slightly higher profile than a typical Saturday morning premiere. That preview gave Jabberjaw a bit of built-in visibility going into its first weekend, a small head start on the audience it would need to keep. Part 4, the problem with the formula. And yet, for all of that, Jabberjaw never found solid footing. The show ran 16 episodes and ended. New episodes stopped airing in December 1976. Reruns continued on ABC through September 1978, including a move to Sunday mornings for its second year, a migration that felt more like a graceful exit than a promotion. No second season was ordered. The reasons are not hard to trace, even from a distance of nearly 50 years. The most fundamental issue was the one that plagued every Scooby-Doo clone of the era. The formula had become deeply, visibly tired.
We must get him out!
By 1976, audiences had already seen Josie and the Pussycats, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, Speed Buggy, Goober and the Ghost Chasers, and a half-dozen other variations on the same template: a group of kids, an animal companion, travel and mystery, and a villain in a mask. With each new iteration, the novelty diminished further. Jabberjaw was the 9th Scooby-Doo clone in the Hanna-Barbera catalog. By then, even children watching on Saturday morning could recognize the pattern. And pattern recognition in children's entertainment is the beginning of boredom. The Saturday morning audience of the mid-1970s had grown up watching this formula in one form or another since 1969. 7 years of the same architecture. Different settings, different animals, different theme songs.
How come he beats me every time?
But the same shape had made the template predictable in a way that worked against any newcomer trying to use it. Even when Jabberjaw introduced genuine novelty through its futuristic underwater world, that novelty existed only on the surface. The scaffolding behind it was as recognizable as ever. What Jabberjaw had going for it, the underwater future setting, the Jaws-inspired premise, the genuinely creative comic persona Welker brought to the title character, was not enough to offset the structural sameness underneath. The show had novelty on the surface, but the architecture underneath was identical to everything that had come before it. There was also the issue of repetition within the show itself, with only 5 original songs in rotation for the musical chase sequences.
See? I told you good old Jabber'd pick up the scent.
the same tracks appeared episode after episode. Compared to other band-based Hanna-Barbera cartoons, Josie and the Pussycats and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, for instance, both had more varied music. Jabberjaw felt thin in that department. For a show built partly around the concept of a rock band, the musical element was surprisingly underdeveloped. The songs served the same function as the incidental chase music did in Scooby-Doo, providing rhythmic energy during action sequences. But there were too few of them to sustain a full season without noticeable repetition. The catchphrase, "I don't get no respect," worked well as a character note in the first few episodes. But when the same joke drives every character beat in every episode of a 16-episode run,
No respect again, not even from a little goldfish.
it stops being a character trait and starts to feel like a crutch. Jabberjaw's status as the perpetually rejected outsider was the only emotional note the show played, and it played it relentlessly in every location, with every guest villain, against every backdrop. There was no arc, no variation, no moment where the dynamic between the character and the world around him shifted even slightly. The villain structure suffered from similar problems. Each episode brought a new antagonist with a scheme to dominate some corner of the underwater world, but without real menace, memorable design, or recurring presence. These villains became interchangeable. The Scooby-Doo formula, at its best, generated genuine suspense from the villain's mystery.
Oh boy, how are we gonna get out of this mess we're in?
Hey, I have a plan.
Who was behind the mask, and why? Jabberjaw largely skipped that investigative layer, giving the characters a series of straightforward obstacles to overcome, rather than genuine mysteries to solve. The result was a show that felt more like a series of action comedy set pieces than a story that built toward anything. Hanna-Barbera was also stretched thin in 1976. The studio was producing programming for all three major networks simultaneously, under significant scheduling pressure. By the mid-1970s, the workload had grown to the point where the studio's creative reserves were being spread very thin across a large number of productions. The quality of the output varied noticeably from one production to the next.
Now you did it. With all that yelling, they're after us again.
And even sympathetic observers noted that the animation, writing, and overall production values on some shows, Jabberjaw among them, reflected the speed at which everything was being made. The rush was visible on screen. Part 5. After Jabberjaw, What Happened Next? Despite its brief original run, Jabberjaw did not disappear entirely from the cultural landscape. The character made cameo appearances in other Hanna-Barbera productions. Jabberjaw turned up as a guest announcer on Scooby's All-Star Laugh Olympics in 1977 and appeared in Scooby's All-Stars in 1978. He was part of a celebrity roast honoring Fred Flintstone on the CBS television special Hanna-Barbera's All-Star Comedy Ice Review in 1978. Later, he appeared as a competitor in Yogi's Space Race.
I've never seen the old clamhead Jabberjaw drill team at work. Yeah!
And made a brief cameo in the Yogi's Treasure Hunt episode, Goodbye, Mr. Chump. A Jabberjaw comic book was planned by Charlton Comics in 1977, but the series was canceled before a single issue saw release. The character did make it onto the printed page through other means, appearing in Marvel Comics' Laugh Olympics tie-in series in 1978 and 1979, and later in Hanna-Barbera Presents Number 6 by Archie Comics in 1996, and Cartoon Network Presents Number 23 by DC Comics in 1999. The series found its way to VHS in 1988, when World Vision Home Video released 4 episodes: Dr. Lowe Has Got to Go, There's No Place Like Outer Space,
That's the dumbest plan I've ever heard.
It's a great plan.
It's dumb! Dumb!
The Sourpuss Octopus, and The Great Shark Switch on a single tape. The complete series had to wait until 2011 when Warner Archive released the full 16 episodes on DVD as part of their Hanna-Barbera Classics collection. In the 1980s, reruns resurfaced on USA Network's Cartoon Express. From 1992 to 2000, the series aired on Cartoon Network, and from 2000 onward, it appeared occasionally on Boomerang, the classic cartoons cable channel. As recently as September 2024, the series began airing reruns on Discovery Family. Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, meanwhile, left Hanna-Barbera in 1977. A BC executive, Fred Silverman, wanting to create competition for the studio that dominated Saturday morning programming,
And then I'll give him one of these, and I'll fin in the...
helped set the two up with their own production company. Ruby Spears Productions launched as a subsidiary of Filmways in 1977, with a network commitment from ABC and backing from producer Peter Roth. Their new studio would go on to produce Fangface, Thundar the Barbarian, Alvin and the Chipmunks, and Mr. T, among others. Ruby Spears was acquired by Hanna-Barbera's parent company, Taft Broadcasting, in 1981, making the two studios sister companies while they continued to compete for the same Saturday morning time slots. Frank Welker went on to one of the longest and most prolific careers in the history of voice acting. He continued voicing Fred Jones across every subsequent incarnation of Scooby-Doo, and in 2002 took over the title role of Scooby-Doo itself.
That's nothing to what I'm gonna do to him.
His list of credits spans more than 800 productions, including Megatron and Soundwave in Transformers, Abu in Aladdin, and Curious George. The comic timing he sharpened on characters like Jabberjaw became a foundational part of the instrument that drove one of animation's great careers. Part 6, What Fell Apart, and What Remained. Looking back at Jabberjaw from today, the picture is one of a show that had genuine potential locked inside an approach that all but guaranteed a short lifespan. The underwater future setting was genuinely inventive. A world of domed ocean cities in the year 2076 offered a canvas that had real possibilities. Science fiction that could have felt meaningfully different from any other Hanna-Barbera property.
He's complaining.
Will you relax, Shelley? We'll be in Aquahama any minute.
The conceit of a civilization that had colonized the ocean floor gave the show a visual identity that none of its predecessors shared. Domed cities, underwater transportation, futuristic technology filtered through the same Saturday morning animation style. On paper, it had room to breathe in ways that Speed Buggy or Goober and the Ghost Chasers never did. Frank Welker's performance gave Jabberjaw a warmth and slapstick energy that made the character likable in a way the scripts often didn't fully earn. Curly Howard's bumbling physical comedy, filtered through Welker's voice and instincts, gave the character a kind of underdog sincerity that landed even when the material around it was thin. There is a version of Jabberjaw where that character finds sharper writing.
I must look my best for my fans.
Whoa, hold the powder, Shelley. You know Jabberjaw has hay fever.
A more varied emotional register, and a world that pushes back on him in more interesting ways. That version never got made. The casting was solid across the board, and Hoyt Curtin's musical DNA gave the show the same melodic grounding he had provided for the studio's best work over nearly 2 decades. But the show around those ingredients was not built to last. It was built quickly, built to formula, and built to capitalize on a moment. The Jaws fever that had swept American culture in 1975, rather than to tell stories that might stand on their own. When the formula was the entire structure, and the formula had already been recycled 9 times over, there was nowhere for the show to go. The broader story of Hanna-Barbera in the mid-1970s
We meet your exorbitant ransom demand. has been studied carefully by the Oklahoma City Council.
Was one of a studio producing enormous volume while creative freshness slipped away. The very people who had designed the formula, Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, had already seen enough of it to want something different. Their departure in 1977 and the studio they founded afterwards spoke to a frustration with exactly the kind of production Jabberjaw represented. There was talent all around it. The instinct to capitalize on Jaws was commercially sound. But neither instincts nor talent alone, without creative risk or narrative investment, could sustain a show past 16 episodes. Jabberjaw ran for one season, lived on in reruns for decades, and earned a persistent corner of the nostalgic memory for viewers who grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons in the late 1970s. For them, that underwater world and that bumbling, lovable shark drummer
You will return to Oklahoma, but not alone. My ray machine
are as fixed a part of childhood television as anything the era produced. The show was syndicated, rerun, released on home video, and eventually found its way to DVD, a longer shelf life than most of the one-season cartoons that surrounded it on the Saturday morning schedule. That affection is real, even if the show itself never fully delivered on what it could have been. It was a product of its moment, rushed, derivative, and commercially motivated, and yet somehow more than that too, in the hands of the people who made it. 16 episodes, one season, and a character too odd and too earnest to be entirely forgotten. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There is a lot more where this came from.